April 16th. Ouagadougou was not asleep. A young soldier on night duty answered an internal call. The voice on the line said only one sentence, "They're already inside," then silence. 3 minutes later, central signals went dark. One officer vanished. 2 others left their posts without a word. No gunfire, no alarms, just absence, and the faces of trusted men. Suddenly missing. How does a nation defend itself from enemies when betrayal is seated at the very heart of command? And in that moment of paralysis, one man did not flinch. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calm, unshaken, stepped out of command and into the shadows. He didn't ask who betrayed us. He said, "I already know," because the truth was never hidden. This wasn't just a coup. It was a script written abroad, executed from within. And in a world where loyalty can be sold, sometimes all it takes to block the storm is one man holding the flame. They didn't storm the gates. They didn't carry guns, shout slogans, or raise flags. Instead, they smiled during briefings. They saluted during promotions. They shook Captain Traoré's hand without blinking, and behind his back they sharpened the knife. These traitors didn't emerge from the forests. They came from offices, from barracks, from strategic war rooms. Their proximity that was their deadliest weapon. One of the 6 was a communications officer with access to internal military intel. Another had handled classified files in counterinsurgency operations. And one of them, he was the very man Traoré once pulled from death's grip on the battlefield. No one suspected them, because they were the system. The plot wasn't born in the dark. It was planned in the open in meetings, reassignments, inspections. But one element made this plot terrifyingly effective. They weren't working alone. One conspirator disappeared from his diplomatic post abroad and surfaced in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire's capital, allegedly under protection. Another remained stationed in national security just 2 corridors away from the High Command's war room. Every piece was already on the board, their aim not to seize power, but to collapse the state, then hand it over on a silver platter to forces that had long lost their grip under Traoré's rule. April 16th. One unit was tasked with disrupting comms. Another took control of guard rotation. A third would escort a foreign entry team into the city. If successful, Burkina Faso's chain of command would have collapsed in less than 4 hours. But they underestimated one thing: Traoré was watching, not waiting. 2 weeks before an internal document was forged. 3 days before a midnight call left a secured briefing room. An hour before the coup, Traoré left HQ for an undisclosed site, and from there he issued the first arrest order exactly as the signal went dead. 4 conspirators vanished. 2 were caught that night. One of them had once sworn, "I will defend the revolution with my last breath." But revolutions aren't saved by oaths. They are saved by clarity and cold resolve. After 2 conspirators were captured, Burkina Faso's intelligence followed the trails they left behind. What they uncovered was far more dangerous than guns, because this plot didn't just run through the army, it reached into the soul of the nation. 3 months before the coup, strange whispers began spreading in the rural north. Village sermons, traditional rites, and ancestral chants started carrying the same undertone: beware the state. Listen to your instincts. Prepare for a sacred shift, not commands, not rebellion, just whispers, subtle, spiritual, and aimed straight at fear and memory. Evil no longer hides in the forests, it rules from the capital. One village chief reportedly said. Burkinabe's security confirmed at least 4 religious figures, including an imam, a pastor, a spirit medium, and a traditional healer, acted as bridges between coup plotters and rural communities. They didn't carry weapons, they planted doubt. What made this plot deadly wasn't violence, it was belief. In the remote zones, a spirit priest's word weighs more than any law. An ancestral chant rings louder than any government decree, and the plotters knew that. They didn't use bullets, they used faith. They didn't attack barracks, they attacked hearts. One intel report stated, A plotter held several secret spiritual councils in an ancient shrine. Other funded rogue broadcasts encouraging suspicion of the government, or a third infiltrated a traditional elder council under a false identity. So here's the question. Did the priests and elders knowingly support treason, or were they also deceived by promises cloaked in tradition? Some said they believed it was their ancestral duty. Some refused to speak. Some vanished from their villages, the night the coup failed. And the most terrifying part. If the plot had succeeded, the coup wouldn't have looked like a coup. It would have looked like a spiritual awakening, a divine reckoning, a return to the ancestors. The people wouldn't resist. They would welcome it as salvation. And so the question burns, how do you defend a nation when belief becomes a weapon, when a sacred song becomes a signal for war, when tradition, the glue of the people, is twisted into a dagger? Let us know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed faith being manipulated for political ends? As national intelligence decrypted the blocked signals from the night of the failed coup, they uncovered a chilling anomaly. Some messages weren't sent within military channels. They were transmitted to zones held by armed insurgents. Why? Because both sides shared a common enemy, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. To the coup plotters, Traoré had dismantled the old order. To the insurgents, he was the uncompromising destroyer, the one who refused foreign aid, rejected negotiation, and doubled down on indigenous counterinsurgency. Traoré was the threat they both feared. And so the unthinkable happened, an alliance born of mutual hate. Leaked documents reveal at least 3 covert interactions between rogue officers and militant leaders along Burkina Faso's northern fault lines, not to debate ideologies, but to carve up the nation before the dust even settled. Insurgents would take full control of the Kaya border corridor. The rogue faction would seize the capital and command structures. Key battlegrounds would be quietly frozen to avoid suspicion. This was not a coup, it was partition, a betrayal of national defense for a slice of fleeting power. And had the plan succeeded, what would have followed? Disintegration of military leadership, fragmentation of command, a militant wave sweeping south unopposed, and Ouagadougou possibly transformed into a gray zone ruled by insurgents and traitors alike. Traoré called it an unnamed alliance between treason and terror. One confidential report added, one conspirator met with a foreign wanted militia representative. Another received payments through an NGO suspected to be a proxy for foreign interference. What's the most terrifying scenario? Not just a fallen government, but terrorists rooting themselves in the heart of the capital. And if that happened, Burkina Faso wouldn't fall alone. Mali, Niger, the entire alliance of Sahel states would splinter. Africa's power balance would crack from within. But the deepest betrayal isn't the strength of your enemy. It's the hand of a friend quietly unlocking the front gate. They didn't have to fire a bullet. Just stay silent and open the door. Topic: Traoré's counterstrike, turning betrayal into revolution. After the coup conspirators were unmasked, most analysts expected Captain Ibrahim Traoré to respond the way African strongmen usually do: mass arrests, televised trials, system-wide purges, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped into the shadows and began restructuring from the roots. His first words after the failed coup weren't a threat. They were a diagnosis. We weren't betrayed once. We've been betrayed for years. The problem isn't 6 men, it's the system that let them rise. That's when the real counterattack began. Inside the military, an urgent operation called Oath Renewal was launched, not just among generals, but at the outermost desert posts and forested border camps. Traoré demanded that every commander submit a loyalty and ideological profile of their troops. Those with half-hearted allegiance reassigned. Those who stayed silent investigated. Those who stood firm brought forward. We don't just need skilled soldiers, we need soldiers who know why they fight, he said. In the religious and traditional realm, After uncovering how faith had been twisted into a coup weapon, Traoré didn't suppress religion. He did something smarter. He brought it to the table. He convened a series of national unity councils, summoning spiritual leaders from across the country, not to control them, but to recruit them into the resistance. Hundreds of imams, priests, pastors, spirit mediums signed a national declaration: faith will not be a tool of treason. Public recitations of loyalty were held in towns and villages, with both clergy and government present. For the first time, law and faith stood on the same side of the barricade. Among the people, Traoré didn't just talk security. He talked clean water jobs, schools. He personally visited conflict zones. No cameras, no scripted speeches, just a man in uniform asking, "What are you still lacking?" Dozens of schools reopened. Mobile clinics were deployed. Water infrastructure in 6 rural districts was restored within 1 month of the failed coup. No slogans, only results, and one clear message. This is what the traitors never planned to give you on the regional stage. But the boldest counterstrike wasn't domestic. It was strategic, economic, and regional. Traoré accelerated the unification of the AES bloc. A joint rail agreement was signed with Mali, linking the countries across borders. A shared finance corridor with Niger was piloted, conducting trade in local currencies instead of the dollar. A tripartite cyber defense initiative was launched against modern forms of infiltration and sabotage. Observers called it the rise after betrayal. What was meant to destroy the revolution instead gave it fire. The coup failed, but it forced a transformation. A stronger, leaner, more vigilant state emerged, one immune to old tactics of manipulation. And just when the world assumed the crisis was over, Traoré threw another punch. He announced a plan to establish the People's Tribunal for National Betrayal, not to settle scores, but to give the people, not just the president, a voice in holding traitors accountable. With each step, the message was unmistakable. You tried to break us. Now we build something that cannot be broken. A coup was stopped. But the story is far from over. When the smoke cleared, the world expected trials, silence, maybe even vengeance. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré chose something else: rebirth. He didn't simply jail traitors. He held up a mirror to the nation and said, "We didn't just catch the betrayers, we raised them. The real fight isn't punishment, it's uprooting the soil that let betrayal grow." And from the ashes of the attempt to end him, Traoré began rewriting the definition of revolution. Not just seizing power, but restoring trust. Not just defending borders, but defending ideals. Not just resisting foreign influence, but rejecting internal rot. Why does this matter to all of us? Because Burkina Faso today is a magnifying glass for a larger question. When an African nation demands real sovereignty, who stands against it? Is it the soldier with a gun, the priest with a sermon, the neighbor with a soft whisper of doubt? In a world where betrayal wears many faces, Traoré chose clarity. He chose action. He chose truth. And this isn't just Burkina Faso's fight. Every black soul ever silenced. Every African story told through a colonizer's lens. Every community labeled as unstable, backward, in need of saving. This is a message from the front lines. We don't need saving. We need space to shape our own future. And in the darkest moment, Traoré didn't call on Western allies. He didn't beg the UN. He didn't run to old empires. He turned to his people. And for the first time in decades, they answered in unity. What do we learn from Burkina Faso? That revolution doesn't end when the government changes. It begins when results arrive. Schools built, water restored, people fed. That the real enemy isn't always across the border, but sometimes sitting beside you, wearing your uniform, speaking your language. This is not a story about a coup. This is a warning. If Africa doesn't protect itself from within, no one outside will. If a preacher can weaponize faith, if a soldier can fake loyalty, if a neighboring capital becomes a safe house for traitors, then the only antidote is not fear, it is awakening. And if you think this is just Burkina Faso's problem, think again. Every African nation has its Traoré waiting to rise. Every truth-teller has their storm to face. And every community has the power to say, no more lies, no more puppets, no more silence. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment New Africa if you believe the continent is rising. Share this video if someone you know needs to hear this truth. And remember, we are not fighting for one man. We are fighting for a memory and a future that our children deserve to inherit. The failed coup against Captain Ibrahim Traoré on April 16th is not merely a military incident, it is a profound national awakening and a powerful lesson for every African nation grappling with internal corruption, spiritual manipulation, and foreign interference. This story transcends Burkina Faso. It speaks to the soul of a continent long fractured by betrayal, cloaked in the robes of loyalty, tradition, and development. First and foremost, this crisis reveals the invisible enemy betrayal from within. When a nation collapses, it is often not because the enemy outside breached the gates, but because the gates were opened from within. In Burkina Faso, 6 men trusted and positioned within. The very institutions meant to protect the state became instruments of subversion. These were not rebels in the jungle. They were commanders in barracks, civil servants, and even spiritual leaders. Their crime, selling loyalty, eroding unity, and plotting a silent collapse of the republic. The lesson here is chilling, yet vital. Internal rot is more dangerous than external threats. No amount of weaponry or foreign aid can secure a nation if its core, its values, its institutions, and its people are compromised. Traoré's brilliance lay in understanding this fundamental truth. He didn't respond with vengeance. He responded with reform. He diagnosed the disease, not just the symptoms. Second, the attempted coup demonstrates how belief systems can be weaponized. Across northern villages, whispers spread not through guns, but through sermons, ancestral rites, and spiritual invocations. This wasn't political propaganda, it was psychological warfare. When faith is turned into fear and tradition into sabotage, the state faces an enemy far more insidious than insurgents with rifles. Burkina Faso's coup plotters manipulated sacred systems to create doubt, weaken morale, and disguise treason as divine reckoning. The African lesson is clear: we must reclaim our faith from political exploitation. Traoré's response was revolutionary, not by suppressing religion, but by inviting it into the defense of the nation. By convening national unity councils and making imams, priests, and spirit mediums part of the solution, he sent a message. Faith belongs to the people, not the plotters. That is leadership rooted in cultural intelligence, not fear-driven control. Third, the failed coup unmasked the geopolitical chessboard in West Africa. One of the plotters fled to Côte d'Ivoire. Others coordinated with insurgents in the north. Financial links were traced to foreign-backed NGOs. This was not simply an internal mutiny, it was a hybrid war, a coalition of mercenaries, rogue diplomats, and disillusioned officers. Their goal wasn't to seize power, it was to fracture the state, to carve Burkina Faso into zones of control and chaos. Here lies the harsh truth. African sovereignty is not just threatened by tanks, it's threatened by deals made in boardrooms, embassies, and media spin cycles. The lesson: Africa must define its own security architecture, as Traoré did, by accelerating the alliance of Sahel states. Joint rail systems, local currency trade, and cyber defense, all were not symbolic actions, but structural moves to sever dependency and build inter-African resilience. Fourth, the people themselves became the shield. Traoré did not hide behind press conferences or armored convoys. He went into conflict zones, no script, no entourage, just questions. What are you lacking? What can we fix? And he followed through. Schools reopened, clinics arrived, wells were dug. Not as political theater, but as silent answers to the coup plotters' unspoken accusation that the state had failed to serve. The moral lesson for all African leadership is unmistakable: legitimacy is earned, not inherited. It is not about flags or uniforms, it's about water in the pipes, medicine in clinics, and truth in speeches. Traoré demonstrated that trust is not built through slogans, but through sweat. That is the revolution Africa needs, not one of guns, but of grounded governance. Fifth, the story is a warning to the continent: the next betrayal may not come with a bang, but with a smile. The danger lies not in open war, but in quiet complicity. When a pastor refuses to speak, when an officer nods silently at a lie, when a foreign capital becomes a sanctuary for those plotting chaos, these are not isolated events. They are symptoms of a deeper illness, the belief that betrayal is survivable if it's convenient. The cure is national vigilance. Traoré's establishment of the People's Tribunal for National Betrayal is not just legal innovation, it is a call for democratic accountability beyond politics. It tells the people, you are not just witnesses, you are guardians. This changes the citizen from an observer to an actor in nation building. In conclusion, the ultimate lesson of this failed coup is that African revolutions must evolve. Not only must we reject neo-colonial control, we must reject the internal dynamics that enable it. Corruption, spiritual manipulation, elite betrayal. These are not foreign inventions, but domestic failings. To rise, Africa must clean its own house, educate its own leaders, and trust its own people. Traoré's response, firm, measured, strategic, offers a new archetype for African leadership, one that blends tradition with truth, security with service, and justice with humility. Burkina Faso did not just survive a coup, it proved that betrayal, when exposed, can become the seed of transformation. Let that be our collective lesson. Let that be Africa's new standard. The betrayal failed, but the awakening began. As an African, reading the story of what happened in Burkina Faso is like looking into a mirror, seeing our collective history, our present struggles, and our untold potential reflected in one moment of crisis. The failed coup attempt against Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just a chapter in Burkina Faso's history, it is a parable for every African nation. It reveals not only the dangers that haunt our borders, but the shadows that linger within. We Africans have learned too well that our greatest enemies often speak our language, wear our uniforms, and even kneel beside us in prayer. Betrayal from within is not new. It is the legacy of a continent fragmented by colonialism and now tested by a deeper struggle, the fight for internal sovereignty. The coup plotters were not outsiders with foreign accents. They were insiders, some of whom once swore loyalty on the battlefield. That to us is the greatest pain, because when betrayal comes, not from an invader but from a brother, it leaves a scar in the soul, not just the state. The African lesson is this: the fight for independence didn't end with the lowering of colonial flags. It continues in our schools, in our villages, in our military bases, and even in our churches and mosques. What happened in Burkina Faso teaches us that the battlefield has shifted. Today, enemies wear suits. They carry briefcases. They speak of aid while plotting domination. They don't fire bullets, they fund media campaigns, pay middlemen, and weaponize belief. That is the new face of war in Africa, and it is spiritual as much as it is political. Faith for us is sacred. It is the rhythm of our ancestors, the bond of our communities, the light that guides us through hardship. So when traitors manipulate our spiritual leaders, using chants and sermons to seed doubt in the people, it is not just betrayal of a government, it is betrayal of who we are. Yet Captain Traoré did not respond with revenge against faith. He brought faith to the forefront. He reminded us that religion is not the enemy, but silence in the face of evil is. That to me as an African is wisdom. It is leadership rooted in our traditions, yet fearless in confronting their misuse. Another lesson is about the role of the people. Too often, African leaders rise to power and then forget the very people who lifted them. But Traoré did the opposite. After the coup attempt, he went to the villages, not for a photo shoot, but to listen. in our culture when a chief walks barefoot into your compound to ask, "What do you need?" that is more powerful than any speech on national television. And that is what Traoré did. He gave people water, reopened schools, and deployed clinics. He reminded us that development is not about statistics, it's about dignity. As Africans, we've been told that democracy is about ballots. But in truth, democracy is about belonging. Do the people feel heard? Do they feel served? Do they feel safe? Burkina Faso's experience tells us that security is not just about guns, it's about trust. Traoré's counterstrike was not just to arrest traitors, but to rebuild trust from the ground up. That is what Africa needs more than ever: leadership that builds, not just rules. We must also speak of unity. The plot against Traoré was not just a domestic affair. It had links to Côte d'Ivoire. It reached foreign diplomats. It connected with armed groups. This is another African truth: instability in one country is never isolated. If Burkina Faso falls, Mali trembles. If Niger weakens, Ghana feels the heat. That is why Traoré's move to strengthen the AES bloc, build a joint railway, and trade in local currencies is not just smart, it's necessary. Africa cannot rise as fragmented tribes. We rise as a united continent, or not at all. To my fellow Africans, I say this: Traoré is not just a president, he is a symbol of what is possible. He is proof that we can be modern without forgetting our roots, that we can protect tradition without turning it into superstition, that we can love our people fiercely without bowing to foreign powers. But let us not make him a saint. That is not what we need. What we need is to make his courage common, to raise a generation of leaders who act like him, not just admire him. We need imams, judges, teachers, and generals who will say, "I will defend my people, not my paycheck." Because this is not just Burkina Faso's lesson, it is Africa's wake-up call. We must confront the bitter truth: some of our worst oppressors look like us. They don't come from France or the US. They come from our cities, our parliaments, our army posts. And until we deal with that, no amount of foreign withdrawal will bring peace. Traoré's boldest act was not catching traitors. It was holding up a mirror and telling his people we raised them. That is the kind of honesty we need, not empty nationalism, not performative patriotism, but real self-reflection. Because Africa will not be free when France leaves. It will be free when the African mind is no longer colonized by fear, greed, or self-hate. We are a continent of greatness, of Mandela and Sankara, of Nkrumah and Lumumba, of women who feed nations and youths who build futures with bare hands. We are not weak, we are not lost. We are simply awakening from a long silence. And now, as I reflect on Traoré's story, I don't just feel pride. I feel responsibility. His example is a call not to watch, but to act, to speak, to organize, to protect what is ours, not with hate, but with hope. Because one day the flame Traoré held in the dark will be passed to us, and we must be ready to carry it. Burkina Faso's survival wasn't a miracle. It was a decision to refuse silence, to confront the comfortable lies, and to pay the price for truth. And as Africans, we must ask ourselves, would we have made the same choice? Would we have stood firm when brothers turned traitor, when tradition was hijacked, when powerful nations watched and waited for our fall? What Traoré has taught us is that sovereignty is not given, it is taken, protected, and paid for. In Africa, we've often spoken about sovereignty in speeches. We've waved flags, renamed institutions, and signed declarations. But none of that matters when your enemies eat dinner with your generals. When your ministries are penetrated by foreign agents disguised as development partners. When your people don't trust the state because the state has never truly belonged to them. What Burkina Faso did after the failed coup was revolutionary, not because of the arrests, but because of what came after. Traoré redefined what rebuilding means. He didn't replace traitors with new elites. He replaced fear with participation. He built councils, not just command posts. He brought villagers, faith leaders, and common soldiers into the heart of national defense. That in African culture is what we call Ubuntu I am, because we are. This is a profound lesson for African state security must be shared. It cannot be monopolized by a few men in uniform or a foreign-funded elite unit. True national security begins when a mother in a rural town knows her child can go to school without being kidnapped. When a farmer can bring his produce to market without being taxed by rebels and bureaucrats alike. When the voice of the healer, the elder, the teacher is no longer ignored by those in suits. Traoré didn't choose cameras. He chose action. He didn't hold international press conferences. He held the hands of villagers. And through those acts he made something radical happen. The state became visible again. In Africa, people have learned not to expect the government to fix their lives. Decades of corruption, broken promises, and puppet leadership have numbed our belief in nationhood. But what if the state shows up? What if a leader walks through the dirt without fanfare and says, "Let's fix the well. Let's reopen this school. Let's do it together"? That's when the revolution begins, not in speeches, but in silence, broken by action. And here is something we must never forget. Traoré was targeted because he stood against a system built to consume Africa. His refusal to let foreign powers dictate military strategy, his insistence on local currencies and inter-African trade, his rejection of exploitative NGOs, all of that made him dangerous, not to his people, but to the empire of dependence, because Africa's greatest threat is not always guns or coups. It is dependency disguised as partnership. Burkina Faso's experience reveals a truth we must name boldly. Many so-called allies are only interested in African failure. They fund our media train, our soldiers write our laws, and when we step out of line, they orchestrate instability and call it internal disorder. As Africans, we must build a new generation of critical thinkers and patriotic reformers. We must teach our youth to question the hand that offers help and to ask at what cost. We must stop glamorizing foreign approval and start honoring local solutions. The world does not owe us development, and we must stop waiting for it. We owe ourselves self-determination. Traoré didn't beg for Western endorsement. He didn't seek validation from think tanks or foreign news anchors. He trusted the soil, the people, and the truth. That to us is dignity, but dignity without preparation is not enough. So the question for Africa now is, are we preparing? Are we building the kind of schools that teach not just how to code, but how to think, how to lead, and how to serve? Are we forming regional coalitions not only to fight terror, but to create jobs, defend our natural resources, and preserve our cultures? Are we investing in traditional knowledge, not to romanticize it, but to preserve it as part of our strategic identity? Burkina Faso has given us a model, but the burden lies with us. We must scale this resistance into policy, into systems, into habit, and we must also be vigilant. Traoré survived this plot, but others will come. Maybe not with guns, maybe with rumors, maybe with sanctions, maybe with fake headlines or disinformation campaigns. In the modern war against African sovereignty, truth is the first target, and unity is the first casualty. That is why we must build systems that don't rely on one man. Traoré may inspire us, but it is institutions, education, and national purpose that will protect us. In traditional Africa, when the village faces danger, we do not wait for the chief. We form a circle, each person bringing their drum, their fire, their voice. That is the spirit we need now. Leaders alone cannot save us, but an awakened people, they can't be stopped. To every African reading this is not just Burkina Faso's story, it is your mirror. Look into it. See your own country's cracks, your own city's whispers, your own family's stories of stolen futures. Then rise not with hate, but with clarity, not with blame, but with courage. And when the next traitor knocks, let him find the door, guarded not just by soldiers, but by a people who know what they're protecting. their dignity, their land, their future. This is how we rise. This is how Africa reclaims itself. Are we investing in traditional knowledge, not to romanticize it, but to preserve it as part of our strategic identity? Burkina Faso has given us a model, but the burden lies with us. We must scale this resistance into policy, into systems, into habit, and we must also be vigilant. Traoré survived this plot, but others will come. Maybe not with guns, maybe with rumors, maybe with sanctions, maybe with fake headlines or disinformation campaigns. In the modern war against African sovereignty, truth is the first target, and unity is the first casualty. That is why we must build systems that don't rely on one man. Traoré may inspire us, but it is institutions, education, and national purpose that will protect us. In traditional Africa, when the village faces danger, we do not wait for the chief. We form a circle, each person bringing their drum, their fire, their voice. That is the spirit we need now. Leaders alone cannot save us, but an awakened people, they can't be stopped. To every African reading this is not just Burkina Faso's story, it is your mirror. Look into it. See your own country's cracks, your own city's whispers, your own family's stories of stolen futures. Then rise not with hate, but with clarity, not with blame, but with courage. And when the next traitor knocks, let him find the door, guarded not just by soldiers, but by a people who know what they're protecting, their dignity, their land, their future. This is how we rise. This is how Africa reclaims itself.